There is a simple psychological pattern that affects all of us. It's called the illusory truth effect, which is a fancy academic way of saying repetition works really well. When you hear a claim made again and again, especially if it's made by different people at the same time, your brain is more likely to trust and believe that statement, whether or not it's true, whether or not it's absurd and obviously not true. If you hear it enough, you start to accept it. In 1977, an experiment, which you can access here, asked participants, how true does this sentence feel to you? They got students to read short, plausible statements. Each student came in 3 times, 3 weeks apart. Some statements were repeated across the multiple sessions, others were not. At the end, they asked the students to rate which statements they believed were most true. The statements that had been repeated quietly and strategically throughout this process were the ones the students ranked as most true. Any statements that were introduced as new later in the process, the students were suspicious of. But they didn't require proof or extra facts. It was the repetition alone that moved these ratings. This is a really important study. It proves the brain is processing repeated statements more easily. What these psychologists found in the context of their behavior study can be corroborated with findings from neuroscience and systems thinking as well. Energy saving is a core basic biological rule for your brain. Your brain is an energy hungry organ. There is a finite bandwidth with what you can do in any 24 hours. Your brain consumes 20% of your energy. It has to keep costs down. You can't process every sound, every sight, every sentence at full critical depth. Your attention narrows the funnel. When you must respond quickly, shortcuts, I've heard this already somewhere, will always beat perfect, critical, paused reflection. And our society rewards that impulse and reaction and quick decision making. Your brain is constantly predicting what's coming next. If the inputs matches your guesses, your brain gets to spend less energy. Repeated inputs have their own well-worn, well-trodden paths in your brain. That's why it feels safe. Less figuring it out, less brain firing, less cost. Your actual processing of the information is easier if it feels familiar to you. This is useful when you're trying to drive home or you see your friend at a party. We feel like it's a stable judgment because the world shouldn't be changing that much. Your brain is not equipped to deal with this level of change and inconsistency from one second to the next. And when threatened, you will shut down and default to predictions that are easy because it saves you energy. But in our modern world, it's leaving you very unsafe. Propagandists have learned to weaponize the fact that if your brain can treat something as easy to process, you are likely to assume it's more accurate. Social media is designed to feed this. If somebody sends you a reel, maybe you can outsource risk. I trust my friend. I don't need to watch this reel. You will remember what you're told, but how often do you remember where it came from? It doesn't even need to be hundreds of exposures either. Research has shown that even a small number of repeats can shift what the population thinks is true. This research from February tested viral AI deepfake videos, and they proved that people who had seen a deepfake once before were more likely to believe its claims a second time, even when they understood it was fake. This 2024 study found that repeating climate science skeptical statements made them seem more credible, even to climate science supporters. The repetition moved perception in the lab, despite the participants' pro-climate science attitudes. And this article highlights that even years after the 2020 elections, the repeat of stolen election claims are still shaping American beliefs. To debunk that one quickly, by the way, the idea that the election was stolen shows an ignorance of how the democracy works in the United States. George Carlin used to say, if voting worked, they wouldn't let you do it. The election wasn't stolen, it was bought. Trump and his allies filed over 100 different lawsuits and then dropped every single one of them because there was no evidence. US politics runs on legal money channels that shape outcomes long before election day. The 2020 election cost about $15 billion between the two parties. Both sides are buying ads and data and messaging in presence. Both sides receive super PAC funding that aligns the politicians to the corporate oligarch. The term lobbying actually comes from the lobby of Parliament in the United States, where these guys would hang around and see, can I give you some money to pass a law? So if you know all of that political context and history, to say that this one election in 2020 was fraud just because Donald didn't win, it's a bit of a bedtime story. But he keeps saying it over and over and over and over and over. Because it's memorable, it rallies his base, and it is an easy plug-in answer that explains the chaos that this bought and sold democracy actually produces. Trump's entire political career has really leaned on the illusory truth effect. Most of what this person says is garbage, and we all know it. But he says it so often that his unhinged rhetoric has now become normalized and mainstream for American politics. Susceptibility to propaganda is not about who has brains and who has degrees. We all have brains that need to take shortcuts. We are all susceptible to repetition. Psychologists gave it a label, so everyone can point to the trick. But knowing the name doesn't keep you safe from it either. Even while in the same breath acknowledging that these statements were absolutely wrong, participants in all of these studies still found themselves agreeing. One of the most important things that you can do to safeguard yourself and other people from falling victim to propaganda is pause. Don't share a reel if you haven't checked the sources. Just don't share it. Keep a tally of how often are you seeing the same phrasing or the same sentiments across different platforms or even different influencers. It's not only the mainstream media who are participants in this ecosystem, it's your favorite TikTokers. Recently, somebody commented on one of my videos saying that they had changed the name of the Department of Defense to the Department of War. That was a false statement. That was propaganda. To know that, all you needed to do was look at the Department of Defense website. It's not called Department of War. Understand that Donald Trump owns the .gov domain and he can use that as part of his marketing strategy. He had set up a website for the Department of War, but the department did not change their name. To not be complicit in an information warfare, to not be a foot soldier for a billionaire, all you needed to do was just Google Department of Defense name change before sharing that on someone else's page. Your opinion is not that valuable to be spamming it without checking yourself first. Propaganda weaponizes your own ego against you, where you get to feel important that you broke some news in a very irresponsible way. If we as individuals can avoid that, it slows down the propaganda mobility. Stop sharing their fucking bullshit without even doing a Google search into it first. 99% of the time, you can source the talking points back to Policy Exchange or the RAND Institute. You owe yourself and the vulnerable people around you not to reshare without consideration, particularly on current events, politics, history, empire, or capitalism. Just admit you don't know. Don't allow speculation to propagate and repeat. Repetition is a weapon.